A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, I was looking up at the sky over Jerusalem last night. It was one of those rare, crystal-clear evenings where the stars actually look like they are piercing through the velvet. And I found myself thinking about the sheer, terrifying physics of what is happening in the layers of the atmosphere we cannot see. When you look up on a quiet night, it is almost impossible to wrap your head around the fact that, at any given moment, there could be objects moving at 7 or 8 kilometers per second, thousands of kilometers away, that our defense systems have to track with millimeter precision. We are talking about the shift from a simple detect and track mindset to a predict and intercept reality.
It is the ultimate high-stakes game of catch, corn. But instead of a ball, you are trying to hit a literal speeding bullet with another bullet, except both bullets are moving at hypersonic speeds and one of them is actively trying to trick you. Herman Poppleberry here, by the way, for those just tuning in to episode 985 of My Weird Prompts. And you are right to be thinking about the physics, because as we sit here in March of 26, the margins for error in ballistic missile defense have effectively shrunk to zero. If you are off by a single millisecond or a few centimeters in your initial trajectory calculation, that multi-million-dollar interceptor sails right past the target and the consequences are catastrophic.
It is incredible. And our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt that gets right into the guts of how we manage those razor-thin margins. He was asking about the ELM 208 SAO Green Pine radar and how it handles the massive data load required for these intercepts. Specifically, he wanted to know about the evolution from just detecting a threat to actually predicting its path through multi-source data fusion. He wants to know why the Green Pine is the unsung hero of the Arrow system's 90+% success rate that we have seen over the last couple of years.
Daniel always has a knack for picking the topics that are the actual backbone of regional security, even if they are not the ones people talk about at the dinner table. Most people know about the Arrow 3 missiles or the Iron Dome interceptors because they see the spectacular videos of the explosions in the night sky. But the unsung hero, the actual brain and the eyes of the operation, is the Green Pine radar. Without that specific piece of hardware, and more importantly, the software that fuses its data with other sources, those interceptors would just be very expensive fireworks. It is not just a radar, it is a complete fire control system.
Right, because detection is only the first step in a very long and complex chain. You have to identify what the object is, where it is going, and exactly when it will get there, all while it is performing complex maneuvers or deploying decoys. So let's start with the hardware itself. The Green Pine. When people hear the word radar, they usually think of a spinning dish on top of a ship or an airport tower. But the ELM-228 is a completely different beast, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It is what we call an Active Electronically Scanned Array, or AESA for short. There are no moving parts. If you saw it on the side of the road, it would look like a massive, flat, rectangular billboard tilted back on a heavy-duty trailer. But inside that billboard are thousands of small transmit and receive modules. Instead of physically rotating a dish to point a beam of radio waves, the Green Pine uses something called constructive interference. By slightly shifting the timing or the phase of the signal from each individual module, the radar can steer its beam across the sky at the speed of light. It can look left, then right, then straight up in the blink of an eye without moving an inch.
That is the phased array architecture. I have always found that fascinating because it allows the system to do something called track while scan. In an old-school radar, the beam has to travel in a physical circle, so you only get an update on a target once every few seconds when the dish points back at it. But with the Green Pine, it can keep a wide eye on the whole horizon while simultaneously focusing high-energy beams on dozens of specific targets. It is like being able to watch a whole football game while simultaneously staring intently at the stitches on the ball.
And the speed is the key. When you are dealing with an Iranian Shahab 3 or a Fatah 1 missile, which we discussed back in episode 9018 regarding Iran's strategic depth, you do not have seconds to wait for a radar dish to spin around. You need updates multiple times per second. The Green Pine operates in the L band, which is the frequency range between 1 and 2 gigahertz. Now, why does that matter? It is a classic engineering trade-off. Higher frequencies, like the X band used in terminal tracking, give you more detail, but lower frequencies like the L band can travel much further through the atmosphere and reflect off targets at much longer ranges. We are talking about a detection range that can exceed 500 kilometers, and in the newer Block 3 versions, it is significantly higher than that.
So it is seeing the threat while it is still hundreds of miles away, likely over Iraq or even deep inside western Iran. But Herman, when we talk about these long-range detections, how does it handle the clutter? The atmosphere is not empty. It is full of noise, birds, weather, and even intentional electronic interference from an adversary.
That is where the gallium nitride technology comes in. This is a major point for Daniel's prompt. The newer versions, specifically the Green Pine Block 3, have transitioned from older silicon-based components to gallium nitride, or GaN, for the power amplifiers. GaN is a total game changer because it can handle much higher temperatures and much higher power densities. This means the radar can push out a much more powerful signal without melting itself. That power helps it burn through jamming and see smaller, stealthier targets that have a low radar cross-section, or RCS. It increases the signal-to-noise ratio significantly, allowing the system to distinguish a warhead from a random cloud or a flock of birds at extreme distances.
I remember we touched on some of the Iranian missile developments back in that episode 918, specifically their work on solid fuels and lowering their radar cross-section. If the target is getting harder to see, the radar has to get more sensitive. But even with a powerful signal, there is the fundamental problem of the Earth's curvature, right? A ground-based radar in Israel, no matter how powerful, can only see so far before the target disappears behind the horizon as it descends, or before it can even see it during the boost phase.
You have hit on the fundamental limitation of any ground-based sensor. If a missile is launched from 1,000 kilometers away, the Green Pine won't see it the moment it leaves the pad, because the Earth is in the way. It has to wait for the missile to climb high enough into the sky to clear the horizon. This is why the hardware is only half the story. The real magic of the Arrow system and the Green Pine is how it integrates into a broader network. We are talking about intelligence and data fusion. This is the shift from being a standalone sensor to being part of a collective consciousness.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. The idea that the Green Pine is not an island. When we talk about data fusion, we are talking about taking the raw radar returns from the Green Pine and layering them with data from other sources, most notably the Space-Based Infrared System Satellites, or SBIRs.
Right? Think of it this way. The Green Pine is like a very powerful flashlight in a dark room. It can see what it points at with incredible detail, but the satellites are like heat sensors on the ceiling. They do not see the shape of the missile as well as the radar does, but they can see the massive heat signature of the rocket motor, the second it ignites on a launch pad in Isfahan or Semnan. The satellite provides the launch warning. It says, hey, something incredibly hot just moved at these specific coordinates.
But that satellite data is often less precise than radar data in terms of the exact trajectory, right? It sees the fire, but it doesn't necessarily see the metal as clearly.
Precisely. The satellite gives you the what and the when, but the Green Pine gives you the where and the how fast. The challenge is the latency. You have to take that satellite data, which is orbiting thousands of miles above the Earth, beam it down to a ground station, process it, and then feed it into the fire control center of the Arrow battery in near real time. If there is a 5-second delay in that data fusion, the radar might be looking at the wrong patch of sky when the missile finally crests the horizon. This is what we call reducing the time to first track.
And we've seen how this worked in practice during the major escalations in 24 and 25. The success rate was well over 90% against complex salvos. That does not happen just because the radar is good. It happens because the system knew exactly where to look before the missile was even visible to ground sensors. If the fusion engine tells the radar to focus its energy on a specific 10-degree corridor because a satellite detected a launch there 30 seconds ago, the lock-on is almost instantaneous.
And it also helps with the decoy problem, which is a huge misconception people have. People think radar just sees a solid object. In reality, when a missile re-enters the atmosphere at Mach 10, it creates a trail of ionized air, a plasma sheath. The radar is actually tracking that ionization as much as it is seeing the metal. Now, as we discussed in episode 929 regarding countermeasures, modern missiles deploy decoys or chaff. But decoys, because they are lighter, will slow down faster due to atmospheric drag than the heavy warhead will. By using multi-source fusion, the system can compare the radar track with the infrared signature from a satellite. A decoy might look like a warhead on radar, but it will have a different heat signature because it is not as massive and does not retain heat the same way.
So the fusion layer acts as an automated sanity check. If the radar says there are 5 targets, but the infrared sensor only sees one significant heat source that matches the expected physics of a re-entering warhead, the fire control computer can prioritize the real threat. But Herman, how do you manage the sheer volume of data if you have multiple Green Pine units, plus US, Navy Aegis ships in the Mediterranean, plus American TPY-2 radars in the Negev? That is a massive amount of raw data hitting the processors at once.
That is the data deluge problem. You cannot just dump all that raw data into one computer. You would get what we call ghost tracks. If 2 different radars see the same missile from slightly different angles and their clocks are off by even a microsecond, the computer might think there are 2 separate missiles. This requires incredibly precise atomic clocks and sophisticated algorithms to fuse those data points into a single, high-confidence track. It is like a digital handshake. We actually talked about this in episode 884 regarding the hybrid defense architecture between the US and Israel. The Green Pine has to talk to the American systems in a language they both understand, and they have to do it with millisecond precision.
And that handshake is becoming more automated. We are moving away from a human operator having to look at 2 screens and decide which one is right. Now, AI and machine learning are being used to perform that fusion at the edge. The system looks at the historical flight paths of thousands of simulated and real launches and can recognize the signature of a specific missile type almost instantly. It can say, based on the acceleration and the radar cross-section, this is a Goddard 110, and here is its likely impact point within a 50-meter radius.
That predictive capability is what allows for the efficient use of interceptors. You do not want to fire a multi-million-dollar Arrow 3 missile at a piece of debris or a missile that is going to land in the middle of the desert. You want to save those interceptors for the threats headed toward population centers or critical infrastructure. The fusion of intelligence and radar data allows for what we call battle management. It turns the defense from a reactive posture into a proactive one. You are essentially playing a game of 3-dimensional chess where you can see the opponent's moves before they even make them.
It really is a system of systems. But I want to push back a bit on the optimism, Herman. What are the vulnerabilities here? If the data fusion is the brain, then the communication links are the nervous system. What happens if those links are jammed or compromised? We are talking about a region where electronic warfare is basically a constant background noise.
That is the nightmare scenario. If an adversary can flood the L-band with noise, or if they can use cyber tools to inject false data into the fusion engine, the whole system can stumble. This is why the Green Pine is designed with significant electronic countermeasures. It can frequency hop, meaning it changes its operating frequency thousands of times per second to stay ahead of jammers. It also uses side lobe suppression to ignore signals that are not coming directly from the area it is scanning. But it is a constant arms race. Better radars lead to better jamming, which leads to better data fusion to see through the jamming.
So, looking at the future, where does the Green Pine go from here? We are starting to hear about things like quantum radar and distributed aperture systems. Is the era of the big, centralized radar site coming to an end?
The next frontier is definitely moving away from these large, centralized targets. While the Green Pine is mobile, it is still a massive piece of equipment that can be seen from space. The future is likely in distributed sensors. Imagine hundreds of smaller, cheaper sensors spread across a wide area, all linked together. If you lose one or two to a strike, the network stays alive. This is called a distributed aperture. It makes it much harder for an enemy to take out your eyes, and that fits into the broader move toward open architecture in defense systems. Instead of having a proprietary radar that only talks to one type of missile, you have a modular system where you can plug in a new sensor or a new AI algorithm without rebuilding the whole thing.
That is a huge shift. It means the Iron Dome or the Arrow of the future might be entirely software defined. The hardware becomes a commodity, while the value lies in the algorithms that fuse the data. It is fascinating how the physics of a radar beam can eventually lead to these massive regional diplomatic shifts. If you can share your radar data with a neighbor, you are essentially inviting them into your security umbrella.
We are already seeing the early stages of a Middle East air defense alliance. If a missile is launched toward a target in the Gulf, a radar in the United Arab Emirates might see it first. If they share that data instantly with Israel or the US Navy, it creates a much deeper defense for everyone. But that requires an incredible amount of political trust, because you are giving another country access to your most sensitive military data streams. It is like trying to get everyone in the world to use the same type of charging cable, but for ballistic missile defense. The technical necessity is driving the political reality.
Well, I think we have really explored the depth of Daniel's prompt today. From the thousands of tiny modules in the Greenbind billboard to the satellites orbiting overhead, it is a massive, invisible web of protection. It highlights that the safety we often take for granted is built on a foundation of incredibly complex math and physics. It is not just about having a big shield. It is about having a very fast and very smart brain behind that shield.
That is a great way to put it. We have moved from building walls to building networks. And in a region as volatile as the Middle East, those networks are what prevent total catastrophe. It is the silent, invisible work of thousands of engineers and scientists. If you want to understand the interceptor side of this better, I really recommend checking out episode 997, where we go deep into the Aero Systems architecture.
And if you found this technical deep dive interesting, definitely take a look at our archives at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered everything from the mechanics of solid fuel rockets to the geopolitics of satellite constellations. There is a lot of connective tissue between these episodes.
It really is all connected. And hey, if you are enjoying the show, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a quick review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people who are interested in these kinds of technical topics find us. We see every review, and it helps us know what you want to hear more of.
All right, I think that is a wrap for today. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Until next time, stay curious and keep looking at the data.
We have covered a lot of ground today, Herman, but I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the L-band frequency. You said it was a trade-off between range and detail. In the context of the newer Iranian threats, like these maneuverable re-entry vehicles, or MARVs, they have been testing, does that L-band limitation become a bigger problem? If the object is changing its path while it is re-entering, do we need more than what the Greenbind can offer?
That is a really sharp question, Korn. And you are right, a maneuverable re-entry vehicle is a different beast than a standard ballistic warhead that follows a predictable parabolic arc. When a target starts zipping around, you need higher resolution tracking. This is exactly why the fusion with X-band radars is so critical, the US. TPY-2 radar I mentioned earlier operates in the X-band, which is a much higher frequency, around 8 to 12 gigahertz.
Right, so the X-band is like a high-definition camera, but it has a much narrower field of view, like looking through a straw.
So the Greenbind, with its L-band, acts as the wide-angle lens. It finds the target and keeps the track alive over long distances. Then, it hands off that coordinate data to the X-band radar, which zooms in to get the precision needed for a terminal intercept. This is the layered approach. You use the strengths of one frequency to cover the weaknesses of the other. Without the Greenbind's long-range detection, the X-band radar would be searching blindly. Without the X-band's precision, the interceptor might not get close enough to the maneuvering target.
It is like a relay race. The data is the baton, and you have to pass it perfectly between different sensors. But what about the role of the humans in this? We talk about AI and automated fusion, but there is still a person in the loop at the fire control center, right?
There is, but their role has changed fundamentally. 20 years ago, an operator might have been manually trying to correlate radar blips on a screen. Today, the human is more of a mission commander. The system presents a fused, high-confidence picture of the battle space, and the human makes the high-level decisions. Things like, do we engage this target now or wait for a better intercept window? Or, if we only have 3 interceptors left and 5 incoming threats, which ones are the highest priority?
That is an intense job. You are essentially playing God with milliseconds of data. I can imagine the psychological toll of that. But it also means the software has to be incredibly intuitive. It cannot just be a wall of raw code. It has to be a visual representation that a human can understand in a heartbeat.
That is a huge part of the development. The user interface, or UI, of these defense systems is as important as the radar modules themselves. It has to filter out the noise so the commander only sees what matters. This is another layer of data fusion, really. It is taking technical data and fusing it into actionable intelligence for a human brain.
We have talked about the US and Israel, but I am curious about the regional implications. As more countries in the Middle East look at these systems, are we going to see a broader region-wide data fusion network?
That is the big geopolitical question for 26 and beyond. The technical necessity is driving the political reality. The threats are simply too fast and too complex for any one country to handle alone. It is fascinating how the physics of a radar beam can eventually lead to regional diplomatic shifts.
It really is. And that is why I love diving into these topics. You start with a gallium nitride amplifier, and you end up talking about the future of Middle Eastern stability.
It is all connected, Korn, just like the modules in a phased array.
Well, I think we've really explored the depth of Daniel's prompt today. From the thousands of tiny modules in the Green Pine billboard to the satellites orbiting overhead, it is a massive, invisible web of protection.
And it is constantly evolving. As we move closer to those quantum radars and fully software-defined defense networks we discussed, the Green Pine will likely look like a relic in 20 years, but its legacy of integration is what will survive.
Definitely. Well, Herman, I think I have learned more about L-band frequencies than I ever thought I would today.
That is what I am here for, Korn, just your friendly neighborhood donkey obsessed with phased arrays.
And I am the sloth, just trying to keep up with the speed of light. Thanks for joining us again, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And seriously, if you have a second, that review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts really does make a difference for us. We want to keep this collaboration going for another 1,000 episodes.
Check out the website, myweirdprompts.com, for the full archive and the RSS feed. We will be back next week with another prompt from our housemate Daniel.
Can't wait to see what he sends next. Until then, take care.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.
You know, before we go, I was just thinking about the term green pine. It sounds so peaceful for something that is essentially a high-powered war machine. Do you know where the name came from?
It is a classic Israeli military naming convention. They often use nature-themed names for their most advanced systems. You have Iron Dome, David Sling, and then Green Pine. It is a bit of a contrast, isn't it? A massive electronic array named after a tree.
It is. But I suppose if you are standing under one, you might feel as safe as if you were in a thick forest. Or at least that is the hope.
I think I would prefer the radar to the trees in this part of the world, Korn, especially if something is coming over the horizon at Mach 10.
Fair point. All right, let's get out of here before I start asking about the specific cooling systems for those GaN modules.
Oh, don't get me started on the liquid cooling. We could be here for another hour.
We will save that for episode 1000.
It is a date. See you all later.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to